Hey everyone, welcome back to Midwest Microbrew. I'm your host, Henry Nosek, and today I'm bringing you part two of my conversation with Dan Carey, the co-founder of New Glarus Brewing in New Glarus, Wisconsin. If you saw our first interview, you already know that Dan is a legend in the craft beer world, but in this one, we get a little bit more personal. We dig into the early days of New Glarus Brewing, from the ground up with basically nothing but sweat equity and a vision, the mentors and brewing icons who shaped Dan to the brewer he is today, and what he says is his greatest achievement after 30 years in the business. And I'll tell you what, the answer might surprise you. We also talk about how Dan manages for the pressure that comes with running one of the most respected regional breweries in the country. It's a candid, wide-ranging interview with a guy who has genuinely seen it all in the craft beer world. Let's get into it. All right, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today again at Midwest Microbrew. I had a few follow-up questions to ask you in addition to our last interview. First one being, what were the biggest challenges in starting your brewery?
For us, my wife and I started the brewery in 93 and we started thinking about it in 92. I was working at Anheuser-Busch at that time as a brewing supervisor. And in order to be successful in a large corporation, in fact, my wife used to say it's a lot like the army, that you have to be willing to be upwardly mobile and move. We were in Fort Collins, Colorado, and where there was an Anheuser-Busch brewery. And at that point, it was the nicest brewery in the system. And in order for me to continue to develop in that company, I would have to be willing to move around the country like every 3 years. The joke was that once you open that last box after a move, it's time to move again. Our daughters were in junior high at that point, and she said, I had been offered a job in St. Louis, and she said, look, she said, my dad moved us around when I was a kid, and when you're in junior high, it's really tough. So it's not what I want to do, but I want to move home to Wisconsin, which was her original where she was born and raised. And so she said, let's go back and I'll build you a brewery and you can make beer for yourself rather than for a large brewery. And but we when we were first married, we lived in a trailer that I think cost $5,000. So we didn't really have any money. We didn't have any family money. So to start the brewery, the biggest obstacle we had was no money. Nowadays, at least up until maybe this year, craft brewers could easily find money. There's a lot of people, like Michael Moore always says, there is a lot of money floating around. You just don't have it. And so it's relatively easy to find investors. But in our day, it wasn't the case. It was hard to get bank loans. It was hard to find investors. And so the biggest obstacle we had was really trying to do everything with sweat equity. So a lot of hours, is probably working 70 hours a week, was 7 days a week, 6.5 days a week, 12 hours a day. Some shifts were 20 hours to try to build a brewery. So not having any money and having to be creative to solve problems. And I did a lot of welding. I did a lot of concrete cutting. I did some electrical wiring. I did a lot of, in those days, craft brewers had to do everything on their own. And we used dairy equipment that we bought at auctions, for cents on the dollar. And so it was a different time. I remember when, nowadays we didn't have the internet, of course, but nowadays people can buy pitchable quantities of yeast online. They don't even need to leave their desk. But we had to get yeast in slants and then propagate them in our kitchen. And so everything was took a little bit more effort. And nobody really understood craft beer in the early 90s. I remember when I first came to New Glarus and I hired some farmers to help me stand up some tanks. They said, so you're going to start a brewery. What kind of beer are you going to make? So I tried to understand, well, we're going to make lager beers. We're going to make pilsners and Hella style beers. And they said, no, 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 no. I mean, is the beer going to taste like Miller, Coors, or Bud? Because I can't drink Bud because it gives me a headache. So don't make a beer like that. Make a beer like Coors. So that was the market that we started into. So it was a different world.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear how things have changed.
Yeah, because nowadays people don't really realize that even people that aren't really beer aficionados are drinking IPAs. But when we started, a beer like that would have just thrown people for a loop.
Really?
Oh yeah,
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. It's a whole different world.
oh yeah. I mean, it used to be bars with taverns would have they'd have Miller High Life in Wisconsin. They'd have Miller High Life, Miller, and maybe a dry beer. or ice beer, and if they were really adventurous, they might have a craft beer amber ale.
Wow, it's a little different. So I guess for my next question, who has been the most influential in your brewing journey?
I've had so many people that have helped me over the years. I think that the thing about being successful in business is you have to work really, really hard, and that's always true. And that's the number one thing. You have to get out of bed every morning and go to work. And but that doesn't guarantee success. There's a level. Never underestimate the value of luck, being at the right place at the right time. But we always worked really, really hard, and I think that sometimes when you work hard, good luck comes your way. So what I mean by that is I had a lot of mentors over the years, people that have helped me, and they helped me and Deb because they saw how hard we worked and that we had passion and were genuine. And brewers responded to my desire to make the absolute best beer I could. My dream was always to make world-class beer. So I had lots of older people help me. I went to the Siebel Institute in Chicago. There was a old brewer, Walter Swistowitz, who had started brewing at the end of Prohibition. And he was one of my original mentors. And he started as a young brewer right at the end of Prohibition. And I remember I asked him one time, what were there were lots of breweries after Prohibition in every small town and even before Prohibition. And so people were kind of looking down on the big national shippers, but were all these little breweries making good beer in those days? He said, no, most of it was really not very good. But in any event, I learned a lot from him. Karl Strauss, who originally came from Germany and was brewmaster at Pabst. He was very kind to me. Probably the person who helped me the most was the principal at the Weihenstephan Brewing School, Ludwig Narcissus, who is basically the Pope of beer. If uh, if you drink German beer, most likely it's been influenced by Professor Narcissus, and he passed away at 97 years old from COVID. But for 30 years, he was my number one mentor, and we spoke every week by phone, and he helped me with every single problem that I faced, which, of course, in a brewery is many. And then another a German brewmaster by the name of Joseph Engelmann, who was just recently passed away at I think 74 years old, but he knew more about brewing than practical brewing, so than anybody that I've ever met. So I could call him out of the blue. He would pick up and I'd say, "Hey, Sepp, I'm having a problem. This is happening in we have a Weiss beer fermenter and this is what's happening." He says, "Yeah, I've seen this. I saw this in 1978. What you need to do is this." And I think, how could somebody know so much about beer? So I guess my point is that there was a whole group of people who have been instrumental in my knowledge. I studied brewing at UC Davis, University of California at Davis. Michael Lewis was my professor, and he's also an iconic name in the brewing business. So, most people won't know these names, but these are the rock stars of the late 20th century brewing.
Wow, that's amazing. It's really cool to hear how much of like a wealth of knowledge certain people acquire over the years.
Oh my God, it is just amazing.
Absolutely. I've been lucky enough to come into contact with some people like that in my life too, and it makes a big difference for sure.
Oh yeah.
So what would you say is your greatest achievement?
Well, building the business is a huge achievement. Obviously, surviving for since 1993, whatever that is, 32 years in business, I think is an achievement. My wife and I are business partners, and we're still happily married together, so that's an achievement. Winning medals is fun, is nice. Having good scores on Untapped, but all of those things are a little bit vain. And to be honest, we have 125 employees in the brewery, and what brings me the most joy is when employees bring their children in, like maybe they have a baby, and so they bring in their new son or new daughter to show off. And I see these young families that are living have a paycheck that is a good paycheck, a living wage, and full health insurance, good medical care, and their families are safe. And so when I see people get married or engaged or have children or buy a house or get a new car, it makes me happy that we're able to make to bring good things to people. I think in the end, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that I'm probably the only principal in a brewery that has a socialist tendency, and I really do feel that our purpose in a business is to take care of first our employees, our community, and then our investors. And if you take care of your employees and you take care of your community, everything else sort of falls into place because the people are what make the difference. If you have good people, and we do, we have the best employees in the world, and when they're squared away, they keep us safe. So I'm, blessed to have them, and that probably is what makes me the most proud.
Absolutely. And what a
Sounds
legacy.
corny. It sounds corny, but it's honestly how I feel.
No, that's a great answer. That's absolutely a great answer. That's a great legacy to leave too. I'm sure your employees are, they know that they're being looked out for and they're
Yeah,
make a
they
difference too.
trust us. We trust them. They trust us. Certainly, we're all imperfect entities with our foibles and mistakes, but as long as a decent effort is put in, we all do well.
Amazing. That's great to hear. Last question from me is how do you handle stress?
Not very well, actually, but I've learned over the years to. I think you have to trust the people around you. If you have good people on your team working with you, you don't feel alone because sometimes stress comes when you're afraid and you're alone. And if you can spread out that burden and know that there are people that are watching your back, if you're watching their back, they're watching yours. So a acknowledgement of that the people around you can help support you, I think is philosophically the first thing. And that's something that to learn trust was a long journey for me because I'm sort of a engineer, scientist, nerd that would probably be happiest in a 500 barrel brewery working by myself. So working in the community was a learned thing for me. But what I do is I love to run. I run and I lift weights. I always lifted weights and always run my whole life. I run weekend races. I run. My heart is. I'm a miler. I'm a middle distance runner, but I run also. I'll run 400-meter races, half mile. 800 meters, 1500 meters, 5K, 10K, half marathons, and I try to run 15 or 20 miles a week, and I'll lift weights twice a week. So that's what really keeps my brain straight. I remember I saw a T-shirt at a race one time that said, "I don't run for vanity, I run for sanity." It's like, yeah, that's it.
That's
That's
a
it.
good way to put it. I haven't heard that before. I appreciate your time so much, Dan.
Yeah.
So
Thank
much.
you, Henry. Nice
Yep.
talking to you.
Yeah, nice talking to you again.
Take care.
Yeah, you as well. Bye.
Bye.
Alrighty, guys, that's going to do it for today. Be sure to check out some of our other exclusive interviews with the people from the best breweries in the Midwest. Bye now.